Who doesn't love Pixar? They make great movies. So, for my ranking, let's just get straight into it. No surprise, Cars 2 is the worst Pixar movie ever made. I will not lie. It is watchable because of how stupid it is, because its attempt at serious themes are laughable. This doesn't even feel like a sequel because it doesn't build on what was good about the first movie. As a whole, it is a betrayal to the Pixar company, and I have no idea how they thought this was a good idea. They took the most annoying character of the previous film and put him in the spotlight, which makes it more obvious that this movie was made to sell toys, and there's no way this spy story with cars was that they wanted to do all along. Used to love it as a kid, but now I would give it a 3 out of 10. The Good Dinosaur might just be the most boring Pixar movie I have seen. It pains me how lifeless this movie is. I only prefer it over Cars 2 because there's some actual attempts at connecting with the audience and there's some really beautiful landscapes. Unfortunately, this is executed poorly, and so it's the most forgettable Pixar movie I have seen. I truly do not think I will ever watch this movie again. But it's still better than Cars 2, kind of, so I'm gonna give it a 5 out of 10. Wow, Cars 3 is shockingly worse than I remember. I remember being excited for this movie for its supposed serious turn, but it was actually the exact same tone as the first movie. There was so much potential here for a good story, but the movie just feels so dull. It's also insanely predictable and the characters are not likable, even the new ones. It's basically just Rocky 4. So, for that, I'm actually going to give it the same rating as The Good Dinosaur, a 5 out of 10. Brave is a unique film for Pixar. The story isn't very strong, but I've always really liked the style the film holds. It feels like something that would be live action and it stands out from the studios' other films. Sure, there's some unnecessary, unfunny stuff here and there, but there's also some scary, badass stuff. So, I'm gonna give it a 5 out of 10. Go check out my Lightyear review on my channel now for more detailed thoughts. This version of Buzz feels almost like a completely different character to what we know from the Toy Story movies. He's meant to be a 90s space hero, but they've turned it into a movie that's too serious and lacks the potential fun that this character and universe holds. I gave it a 5.5 out of 10, and the more I think about the movie, the more I don't like it. A lot of people are going to disagree when I say this. Inside Out is so overrated and I think it's dull and predictable. Its ending is really good, I won't lie, but the characters aren't likable to me at all. I never cared for Riley because even with emotions, she has no character. I never cared for any of the emotions themselves, and a lot of the choices are just completely stupid. Good ending does not make it a good movie. Some stuff doesn't even make sense in how they try to build this world. So I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Luca. I don't know whether to call this movie overhyped or overrated because I do not know if it's either. The first act of Luca is so boring. Nothing about the characters interested me, and I never really cared for their goals. I still enjoy the rest of the movie, but there's just some things that don't really work about the characters. Nothing really happens in the story that becomes a staple for Pixar. Nothing breaks any new ground, and its villain is completely pointless and stupid. But I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10. I actually like Monsters University. Sure, the new characters aren't very funny, but I really love the message that the movie has. I love that Mike has a clear dream to be a scarer and has worked so hard to become one, but has struggled with the fact that he's not scary. The film also has an incredible final act and leads into Monsters Inc. in a very satisfying way. I think I'm one of the only people in the planet who actually quite likes this movie, and I'm also going to give it a 7 out of 10. I can't believe it's taken me this long to realize how unlikable Lightning McQueen is. He is such a jerk in this movie, and his redemption at the end is a lot more satisfying. I've usually enjoyed this movie, but I never realized how long it is. There's quite a few slow scenes that could have been cut out to shorten the runtime. There's also not a lot of color in this movie. Everything looks almost lifeless, but I still enjoy the movie as it is. There's some good messages here and there, and I would call this a decent Pixar movie. I'm also going to give it a 7 out of 10. Incredibles 2 is one of the most disappointing sequels ever made. It really just dumbs down everything great about the first movie. Predictable and non-interesting villain, smaller scale story, uninteresting plot, and characters barely doing anything. In the first movie, the entire family had purpose in the story. In this one, the family does nothing while Elastigirl gets to do stuff. The animation is phenomenal, and there's still plenty of entertainment to be found in the movie, but it's still a disappointment, so you also get a 7 out of 10. I think A Bug's Life is severely underrated. For one, it had an excellent villain. He's interesting and has character. Sure, it's one of those liar stories, but it doesn't feel like a direct copy of them. There were definitely some cool ideas they had for the film, and most worked well. It just isn't very good as Pixar's second movie. There's nothing unique it tried to do, and for that, it feels underwhelming. 7 out of 10. Turning Red is definitely a movie that exists. It only feels unfitting for Pixar because of how insane it is. It's hard to explain, but there's so much energetic feelings shoved into this movie, and almost works well as it fits the ages of these characters. Definitely some good emotion here that convinced me that this was a Pixar movie. I originally gave this an 8, I think, but I'm gonna move it down to a 7 out of 10. Is it just me, or does no one like Onward? Why does no one like Onward? I understand that it's the least Pixar feeling movie and honestly feels like something DreamWorks would do, but there's still some good storytelling. Other than a subplot that I found pretty boring, the protagonists are enjoyable and I was engaged in their journey. Also, isn't it cool that Chris Pratt and Tom Holland are in a Pixar movie together? It doesn't break much ground, but it still contains some engaging characters, a satisfying ending, and an entertaining runtime. 7 out of 10. Finding Dory is a decent sequel. Much like the first movie, there's some truly breathtaking visuals, and the characters managed to contain the same personality they had. A lot of the new characters are actually very entertaining as well. There was no dull moments to be found, and I really love the fast pacing the movie has. Decent sequel, but like Incredibles 2, I do not like the smaller scale story. 7 out of 10. Other than Lightyear, Toy Story 4 is the weakest Toy Story movie. Easily the best animated, obviously, but it's more of a Woody story than it is a Toy Story. I would call this an end to Woody's great character arc than an end to the Toy Story movies. My biggest flaw is that the gang barely get any screen time together, as the majority of the spotlight is on Woody. But I would also call this the funniest Pixar movie, thanks to its new characters, an 8 out of 10. Soul was a surprisingly touching movie. Not many animated films get to explore the theme of life. It's refreshing to see a story with such unique ideas, but it was a bummer this went to Disney Plus, as it would have been great to see in theaters. Joe Gardner is an engaging character, and every sequence in the real world is entertaining. As other sequences may not be as fun, they still have some cool ideas, and the climax of the film was very satisfying. 8 out of 10. Coco is very much a Pixar movie, as it has good characters, great animation, a fun adventure, and one heck of an emotional ending. It's very understandable that this is one of Pixar's most highest rated films. My only problem is that it has a few cliches, especially with its villain, which unfortunately brought this movie down from a 10 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10. WALL-E. Where do I start? This film reminds me of how great the company is at creating concepts, as the very concept of the story is brilliant. The story is original and sweet and pays off in its ending. What I love so much about the movie is that its protagonists cannot speak many lines, and they are robots, yet so much emotion and personality is put into the characters for the audience to connect with them. One of Pixar's most unique cinematic films, and a 9 out of 10. Up is one of the strongest films to gut punch the audience and connect with them within the opening. You most likely already know the effect that the opening has. Immediately, I was connected to the character of Carl. He has a great arc and a great ending, surrounded by a beautifully animated environment and some of the funniest characters in Pixar. Another 9 out of 10. Toy Story was clearly a revolutionary film, and you have to support the amount of work that went into animating this movie at the time. Work is put into every film, but documentaries about Toy Story are very fascinating as it originally was not meant to be like the movie we have now. The story has been thought out very efficiently, and the plot itself is a perfect example of what animated films should be: simple and engaging. This is the gold standard for animated movies. It has a great story, great characters, great music, and for its time, decent animation. A 10 out of 10. Monsters Inc. Another example of a phenomenal concept being executed to perfection. The world building is amazing. Pixar took such a relatable fear and turned it into one of the funniest and emotional animated films to exist. Lots of well-designed characters in a well-designed world, and one of Pixar's most easiest watches and easiest rewatches. 10 out of 10. It took me a while to realize Toy Story 3 has very similar story elements to its predecessor. But even with that, the impact of the story is much different, that it doesn't feel like it's ripping off Toy Story 2. The writers managed to conclude the story of all these characters in such a fun, exciting, and emotional way. I still will always appreciate the prison break element of the plot, as it's one of the most entertaining sequences. Still a 10 out of 10 in my book. The Incredibles is such an action-packed, engaging, and surprisingly dark movie. I will always love how dark the movie gets because Pixar hasn't been able to take such risks since. Even with superpowers, the writers made these fictional characters so relatable with their family dynamic. Its story has such a large scale and is an incredible adventure that I love to come back to from time to time. 10 out of 10, please make another dark adventure, Pixar. Ratatouille. Every time I watch this movie, it doesn't feel like a kid's movie at all. I adore how intelligent the writing is, how the film can connect with certain audiences. Brad Bird did such a great job at giving every single character their own personality, leaving them all feeling different and interesting individually. It may not be able to connect with really young kids, but eventually the effect of the movie is much more stronger once you understand the phenomenal message in the realistic dialogue. 10 out of 10, and the movie is always great every time I watch it. Toy Story 2 is one of the prime examples of a sequel done well. Let me explain. Toy Story 2 has a larger scale story, great new characters, new character development, better animation, better plot, and much more emotional moments. It's strange that the most nostalgic aspect of the movie to me is the sounds. There's so many satisfying sequences, and I gotta appreciate the production team for their work, even though the movie almost got deleted. 10 out of 10. And my number one favorite Pixar movie, and probably my favorite animated film ever, is... I will adore this film to the end of my life, as it is not just my favorite Pixar film but my favorite animated film ever. Plenty of people disagree with me, but I don't care. From story to animation to characters, this movie is a blast. To start, I love the whole plot as it doesn't feel like such a fictional plot, because if a parent did lose their child they love, they'd be terrified and want to have them home. That's what I love so much about the story. It can be a human story on its own, but it being about fish creates this whole big plot with lots of adventure and characters. Marlin has a really good arc throughout the movie as well, and although I'm not a big fan of Ellen DeGeneres, Dory is an incredibly likable character too. Because this is such a big adventure with no dull scenes, I'm always entertained throughout the runtime. Once again, in my opinion, this is my favorite animation from Pixar. Obviously, today's animation is much better, but for 2003, this film has some gorgeous animated settings. The entire film is assisted with an amazing score by Thomas Newman that keeps me even more interested. His music is incredibly catching and relaxing. The film has two plots with different characters and both have great purpose and lead into each other perfectly. This is the one Pixar film that really makes me cry in the beginning, middle, and end, as it has a tragically sad opening with a certain happy moment in the middle that makes me cry happy tears, and I cry even more happy tears at the sweet ending. I don't know how many times I've watched this movie. It was one of my favorites when I was younger and is my favorite now. This is also one of the only animated films I've seen that takes place in my home country. So that's a big win. I will defend Finding Nemo forever. I adore it now and forever. Obviously, a 10 out of 10. Alright, we made it. As you can see, I've put the films into their ratings here if you couldn't be bothered listening to my reviews. But if you've made it through this entire video, I want to personally thank you for your sacrifice. Seriously though, thank you so much for watching. Please check out my other videos as the channel hopefully continues to grow. And I'll see you next time.